It's 2025. It's about to be 2026, and we're seeing so many numbers around financials and restaurant affordability. And so that's the topic that we're going to tackle today. My name is Justin Khanna. This is the Repertoire podcast. I'm here for another Repertoire report with Ray DeLucci. How are you doing, Ray? I know that I rolled solo without you this past week
Oh,
for the first time in a long time, and the people responded well. It was
mhm.
nice to be kind of back and jamming on something on the fine dining side of things with that Michelin episode. So if you haven't listened to that, please go ahead and listen. Welcome back, and it's just great to be jamming again.
Yeah, same with you. I mean, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to the audience. We had one of our best weeks ever in terms of engagement, views, reach. I think Justin and I's goal is to be a channel that presents food news, presents food topics, and really add value to those topics and like kind of break them down. And so it was really awesome to be rewarded with views and just like general likes and engagement. So thank you to everyone that watches.
And yeah, if you are enjoying it and there's somebody else who you think would be like, hey, this story is really, really interesting, you don't have to share the full episode with them. So on YouTube specifically, if you're like a podcast only listener, we sometimes, it's not for every single story on every episode, but for especially the bigger stories, we kind of clip those out. And so if you have like a take where you don't want to quote unquote burden somebody with an hour long episode, you can just go to YouTube on the Repertoire channel. We typically link most of those in the description or the show notes of every video, and you can send those along to people who like, I think this person is really interested in food manufacturing. This person's really into fine dining. And so we try to do that so that as the wide range of topics that we cover on the show, we don't go that far outside of our lane, but I think it gives you the opportunity to kind of like, again, help us to reach more people too in a way that, might add value to you in your career. So Ray, I know that you had a couple of stories on food affordability and kind of the state of things. So why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, affordability has been a topic, not just in the restaurant world, but in the broader world in general. Things are more expensive. People feel like their dollar is not being stretched as far, and we're seeing this in restaurants. I have personally seen so many videos on YouTube on the death of fast casual, the death of dining out, why you can't afford to eat. And we're gonna break down why, at least our opinions, my opinion, Justin's opinion, on why it's so much more unaffordable to go out to eat and kind of the major drivers behind that and maybe some misconceptions. So that's where we're going to start off. So, Justin, there's a article out by Restaurant Dive that I thought was really interesting. And the line of this is majority of US diners think menu prices are too high. So they go in and they kind of break down some numbers. So over a third of American diners, 37%, say they have dined out less frequently in the past 12 months. That is a proportion that increases to 44% among low-income diners, according to polling from YouGov's U.S. Dining Report 2025. Only 28% of consumers say they feel their restaurant prices are priced at a fair level, which is like so crazy to see. And they go on to say that a majority of Americans, 82%, said they feel that menu prices have risen considerably in the past 12 months, and 69% of consumers who have reduced dining out so they have done so specifically because of price increases, with 60% saying they are trying to save money, and then 57% saying they are facing increased costs of living. And so the last bit of data that I find interesting, I know a lot of numbers here. Among the diners cutting costs, 60% said they are choosing cheaper restaurants, while 53% said they are using discounts or coupons, and 51% are ordering fewer items. And so what we're seeing here is customers have accurately I guess, found out or they've accurately seen that prices have risen. We covered this a while ago in the Repertoire report that many restaurant owners have had to increase pricing. Uh, Tariffs is a big part of it. Supply chain's a big part of it. Labor costs are a big part of it. There's not one thing, and this is where I want to start this conversation is like, there's not one thing you can point to and just totally blame. You can't totally blame tariffs. There is a part of it. You can't totally blame labor. There is a part of that. You can't totally blame just rising costs in general or supply chain. It all is culminating in what I think is like the perfect storm for restaurants to not be affordable for the general consumer right now. Restaurant prices are getting higher because costs are dramatically high. And as you've talked about, Justin, the cost of owning a restaurant was always not, it was never good. It was never anything you would want. The profit margin being 3 to 5% was already insane. It was already a hard ask. So if you had a business model that was operating on such thin margins, and you now come into a period of time in 2025 when everything's more expensive, supply chains are not getting better, prices are only rising for operators, you get to this inflection point now where many restaurants are just outpricing their customers simply because they didn't price there then they wouldn't be able to pay rent or, operate themselves as a business. So before we even get into this, I would just want to ask you, Justin, like, I think a lot of times there's a lot of negative criticism to restaurants, that it's like, oh, you're overpricing, you're getting greedy and whatnot. But the reality is, I don't. There always is going to be pricing issues. We talked about price fixing. We talked about greed in the food industry. But right now, I think these prices are simply where they need, are the baseline where they need to be at to stay alive. Maybe not for a Starbucks, maybe not for a Chipotle per se, but it's close. But for most restaurants, their pricing right now is due to how high costs are, and I would bet that they're still not covering what they need to make a profit that they would want to see. Your thoughts?
It's a much easier set of feet to stand on when you're able to provide those hard numbers behind why the costs needed to increase. And I think that's the big thing that we've been at least trying to encourage folks on the show with. As your costs go up, make sure that in tandem with that, your prices are going up. And then you have the wherewithal to understand what's happening macroeconomically to be able to explain to people, this is why XYZ dish or this menu item or this thing that you are so used to ordering at one price is now needing to be charged for, 30% more in a lot of cases, 50% more, depending on, what we're talking about here. And I think that that's where people get stuck, is that they almost do it in the wrong order. They like wait until things get a little bit too tight and then they have to like go a little bit too fast with the price hike, or they increase it, but then they don't communicate. And I think what I'm trying to maybe advocate for, or at least I've tried to keep my story straight here, is like exactly kind of what you were alluding to, Ray, where it's different if you're going to jack up the price in a way where it is either monopolistic or there's no grounds for why these prices needed to change. And you as the company is like rolling in cash. And I think that is like the difference that you highlighted so beautifully, is like the margins are not huge here. And also, to be very clear, like I am not opposed to people making profit, but at the same time, like any time that you see a company or brand get overextended with the amount of profit that they're making, that's the famous Jeff Bezos quote, your profit is my opportunity. Like you're going to invite competitors to come in and try to like take a piece of that or undercut you or anything, or, like those sorts of behaviors in the market. And so that's number one. Number two, I think similar studies that we've covered on the show in the past have talked about these like ratios between people's income and what they're spending on food. And I think that's also just a really big conversation that like is not on the restaurant to bear as a responsibility. Like people's wages either stagnating or, like not keeping up with inflation or any of these problems that we're seeing in the economy, is like that onus getting put on restaurants for raising their prices. Like that's also a little bit, effed up. Sorry, pardon the French. But I think that is also something that, again, just doesn't get talked about enough, I would say. And then what I really want people to like, just to really hammer it home, raise the price and also know exactly what your costs are. I think that it seems like trivial to you and I, Ray, because we sometimes harp on the numbers a little bit too much. But we're going to cover a story later on today in the show where it's not a skill set that everybody naturally possesses. And I use that word in the context of your repertoire because it is something that you can improve on if you have the awareness and wherewithal to say, this is something I'm going to start to care about. This is something I'm going to decide to go to a beginner's mind on. I'm going to seek out resources to improve this as a skill, not just for myself, but for my business. And so, again, big advocate for like, people need to charge what they need to charge, like full stop. And then from there, we can talk about some of the other things we've been highlighting with adding increased value. The article that you are highlighting and linked in the show notes here talks about loyalty programs being a thing that customers are particularly interested in. And so there's other things that you can do from the place of financial almost safety, right? Like we got to start with, like the airplane, like a motto of like, be safe first, then start to kind of like have a little bit of flexibility, and then you can start to take risks. And I feel like people are so far in the negative that you're not even safe, and that causes all sorts of downstream effects.
Let's talk about that real quick. I think of what our value add is to people listening is we give solutions where possible. And so Food Dive actually articulates or hones in on what Justin just said on different items. So customers really value 1%, or they really value value menus. Like McDonald's saw 1% during the second quarter, an increase in value menu items. They've been adding the McValue menu items. I'll just say this: like, watch big brands what they're doing now because they're feeling the same thing as independents. Independents feeling a ton more, obviously. But the way big brands are moving is like probably the way that you should be moving as well in terms of menu structure. So they say that 58% of diners said buy one get one offers are the top incentive that would get them to dine out. I'll just talk to this from like a behavior uh, perception. I was back home. My sister needed to go to Barnes and Noble. I went there. I wasn't going to buy anything. They had a sale, buy one get one half off for these two books that I wanted. I grabbed it. They just got a sale out of me. Like, it just that value add right now. Like when things are expensive, like it's something that you can leverage. Um, People said 56% said discounts would drive occasions. I just got a mailer in from Jets Pizza. Guess what we're having for dinner this weekend? Jets Pizza, because I can save some money. Like it's all good. Um, and this one I thought was really interesting. So, BOGO promotions are likely to encourage low-income diners. Middle and high-income diners were more likely to prioritize discounts. So this is another big thing. If your customer base is leveraged towards more like lower income people, they want BOGOs. They want buy one get one frees. If you're a little bit, have a higher price point and you have middle to high income earners, they are more interested in discounts. So that, again, you can't. If you're going to be really tactical right now, you can't just paint a broad brush on how you're going to make things more affordable. And so these need to be layered in. The last thing I'll say is that having a rewards program or a loyalty program is really great. Only 32% of Gen X and baby boomers said they've used one compared to younger generations using them more. And then I would say that lastly is just like this idea of if you're going to make sales or you're going to make items that are valuable, ensure that the product itself offers that value. I think we'll get into this in a minute. The Sweetgreen, the Chipotles, they went from darlings to the average to someone like me, out of college, low income. I could go get a whole burrito bowl for like $8 and it was amazing. They've slowly priced out their market because of their costs. I would argue that you still get good value. From being in restaurants, I would still argue you get good value for that meal. But whatever you're offering needs to have a value perception tied to it. And that's really important because if you give a sale or a discount, it doesn't meet that value, then they're likely not to come back. So any more thoughts on this first up, just the raising in prices before we go to maybe how restaurant prices are operating now?
Yeah, I want to get some input from the audience if anybody has seen something like this. I certainly haven't, or at least I haven't worked in a place that emphasizes something like this. We talk about the low end, not said in a derogatory way in any way, shape, or form, but we're talking about, McDonald's, fast casual places, more mass market, trying to be affordable, trying to be places you can go multiple times a week, or at least at minimum multiple times a month. But is there a world where some of the higher ticket places could actually leverage some of these tactics? And I think you and I, Ray, sometimes see these stories or influencer drama pieces about people going to a fine dining restaurant on the 1 Michelin star to 3 Michelin star level. And in a lot of ways, I've mentioned this on the show before, this is that team's one and only opportunity to ever interact with you. And is there a world where that is just a assumption? That is something that can be challenged. That can be something where there's an opportunity where, again, doing it in a, coupon, BOGO, type of way maybe doesn't align with the brand of a 2 Michelin star restaurant. But is there a world where an extended invitation to return again when our seasonal menu changes could actually be a really cool hospitality step for somebody who you identify through the front of house touch that you have with that table that they are living locally? We talked about some of the credit card things where, again, my wife and I are trying to plan one of these things because I have a credit card that gave an offer, and we are trying to, think about like going to a place that we have frequented in the past, because I'm not going to keep this credit card going forward. And so I've mentioned that on the show, like I'm trying to, slim down and simplify things for myself. And so all of these, again, like little insights, all of these companies and POS systems are talking about like, data. We have data on your guests. But then it's like, what do you do with that information is something we've also talked about in the past, where you can be drowning in spreadsheets, but how does that actually change the behavior of how you and your team take care of people in your business? Like, there's an interesting opportunity there. But again, the one pushback and devil's advocate for even just myself here as I'm spitballing on this is these aren't the people who are struggling, quote unquote. Like they don't need to see any affordability things. But at the same time, to the person who has saved up for weeks or months, and because they know it's going to be a high ticket thing, is there something you can do to get them to come back again? And then you have basically, instead of having them go and try out another restaurant, they would rather just deepen the relationship that they have with you because you are saying our summer menu is now different than our winter menu. I don't know, just something interesting, and I haven't exactly seen it before. The only unfortunate thing that we have covered before is like loyalty clubs on the fine dining side, which I think Ray and I have also kind of like shared our negatives on.
Yep, definitely. Well, I think I think we what makes sense for us to go into next is menu pricing. So National Restaurant Association shared a menu pricing update on October 24th. We didn't get into this. There's been a lot of news going on. Felt topical for right now. So this is about a month ago. So they do this research on menu prices, and they shared that menu price growth slowed in September following solid gains this year. So Justin, if you remember, we covered a couple months ago, menu prices rising, operators feeling that they need to raise their menu pricing, and some operators raising prices, but not even raising them enough to cover the cost. And this was something that happened during when tariffs were first implemented. This was like April. There was like a stat where even if like menu pricing increased however much the restaurant operators were like increasing them, they still wouldn't be as profitable as they were like 2 years ago. So like these margins keep getting thinner. So I think what restaurant operators are seeing now though is that customers are reacting really poorly to the rise in menu pricing, which is obviously very unfortunate. So they say that consumer prices rose 0.3% in September. It's a slight moderation from 0.4% in August and marginally better than expected. It was driven by a 1.5% rise in energy costs, with gasoline prices up 4.1%, and then food prices edged up 0.2% on menus overall. And so what I found interesting is that actually we've talked about how a consumer might not go to a restaurant, but they might splurge in grocery. But what they find here is while menu prices in restaurants edged up just 0.1% in September, which is the slowest monthly increase, Justin, since February of 2024, grocery prices have risen 3.7% since September 2024, down from 3.9% in August. So this increase in grocery pricing is actually what's affecting consumers. Now, the unfortunate reality of this is these trends won't be felt or they probably won't be noticed for a while. So actually, it's kind of flipped where in the beginning of the year, grocery items were probably more affordable. And now it's the opposite. Restaurant prices aren't rising as much, but grocery prices are. So there's just like this influx. And one other report, the Restaurant Performance Index that I'll share, this is the monthly index that tracks restaurants. A little bit concerning. Restaurant Performance Index declined 0.4% in September. Basically, the decline was due to dampened current situation indicators. And they say, although restaurant operators posted a modest net increase in same-store sales in September, they reported negative customer traffic for the 8th consecutive month. They're also saying that 34% of operators only expect higher sales in the next 6 months. And they also said here that most restaurant operators have an uncertain outlook for the sales and economy. 46% of operators expect their sales to remain flat, and 40% of operators reported that their sales were down. Only 11% said they expect economic conditions to improve in 6 months. So I think what we've seen here, my take, you let me know, is menu prices rose. The grocery prices did not follow. So grocery was a more cheap alternative. You then have restaurant prices getting so high that like now there's like these YouTube videos and whatnot. And so now it's just like more expensive to eat out than ever before. Now though, you're going to see that like restaurant pricing is probably going to fall back to, or not fall, but like grocery will catch up and there might be some balance. But right now it's very hard for restaurants due to this perception that they don't offer the value they once did. So your thoughts on this data and what you think happens moving forward?
There's some fascinating psychology information on like personal finance, if you've ever dug into that, where it's not necessarily how much you're making, how you feel about your financial standing is very much so correlated to how you compare to your neighbor, or how you compare to your coworker, or how you compare to your spouse, or whatever it happens to be, your friend from college. And so as we start to see all of these pressures being put on different sectors of the industry. You highlighted grocery, we've talked about restaurants, we talked about fast casual restaurants and fine dining restaurants and cooking at home. And so it's almost like exactly how you're wording it. Each of these need to kind of like relative to one another catch up so that we get to this place where grocery seems quote unquote more affordable because I'm seeing all these videos on Instagram of how easy it is to make restaurant quality food at home. And I compare that to the pricing that I see at a restaurant nearby me that has just jacked up their prices, quote unquote, to how I'm perceiving it. And it's like, oh my goodness, this is such a good deal. Like I should just stay at home. And then, all of a sudden we see something swing from the consumer pricing index where grocery prices go up. And now all of a sudden you look at your grocery bill at the end of the month and you're like, was it that much cheaper? And then now you're second guessing, you're questioning because now it's not that it's almost like everything just actually accuratized out, so to speak. And so seeing all of this kind of like go over time, I think will hopefully serve as a forcing function for operators who are like stressed about raising their prices because they don't want to be the first mover. I think that's what you'll often see. It's not that I don't think that I need to raise my prices. I'm seeing it in the numbers that I need to raise my prices, but how I'm going to be perceived compared to the restaurant down the street is going to be really, really hard. And so it's almost like you want to be the last mover to do this stuff. So you seem as the quote unquote good guy who wasn't greedy, quote unquote. And so all of this is just really fascinating to watch. And again, like the more we start to see it normalized, I think we will see more people do it. And again, it sucks for the consumer who isn't making any more money on a monthly basis.
Accurate assessment. We'll get into that in a minute. One thing I did find interesting, and this is the psychology piece of this. Despite all of this is the last thing in the restaurant report. A majority of restaurant operators are still planning for capital spending in the coming months. 51% of operators said that they plan to make a capital expenditure for equipment expansion or remodeling during the next 6 months. This is the sixth consecutive month in which a majority of operators reported plans for capital spending. Very interesting. It's interesting to just like, even though we're not doing well, they're still investing in their business. One thing to piggyback off this before we get into the Chipotle Sweetgreen topic is Food and Wine put out an article on November 14th. And it was titled "The Menu Items That Keep Getting More Expensive and the Surprising One That Isn't." And so everyone's kind of agreeing. They're saying this as well, that after months of sharp increases, inflation of menu prices appears to be steadying. So November 2025, we're finally seeing menu prices kind of steady off, whether it be demand from the consumer or just overall like lower costs in some sectors. What they say is they give the example of the burger. Median price of restaurant burgers hits $14.53 in October, an increase of 3.2% compared to last year. Cold brew has a current median cost of $5.53 per serving, while regular coffee sits at $3.57. And they share that chicken wings are the only things that really haven't gone up. But they do cite kind of this idea of sticker shock and making lower cost items. And again, Food and Wine is also touting the BOGO versus the discount narrative. So I think all that to say is like menu pricing is starting to steady off. If you are a consumer, maybe there is light at the end of the tunnel, but there's a lot more to go for us to see on this. Justin, we'll go into Sweetgreen and we'll go into Chipotle. So this idea of the slop bowl, Justin shared this term with me. We did a video on it. And so now we are talking about fast casual. And there's been, like I said before, many viral videos on why Chipotle is failing, Sweetgreen is failing, Tava's failing. And I wanted to start with an article as for the story is the Food Dive. They shared January 27, 2025. They said 2025 could be fast casual's year again. And so fast casual had this boom from the late 2010s into the early 2020s. And so they said that long-term trends in consumer preference have put fast casual chains in a position to leverage price sensitivity, digital touchpoints, and an appetite for human connection. And so basically what happened is they were predicting that because of prices that were high, economy that was kind of teetering, fast casual was going to come out on top because of their leverage and their price point. What happened is the exact opposite. The perception of a Sweetgreen or a Chipotle is you don't give me enough. The value is low. I've read comments on the YouTube channel. Quality isn't there. They're just not as good. I can make this better at home. And so you have two stories today. You have the first one from Nation's Restaurant News. Sweetgreen's 9.5% same-store sales decline highlights value perception issues. They reported a steep sales and profit decline for the third quarter ending in September 28th. Thursday's earnings call, they acknowledged that they're grappling with a value perception problem. The stock has dropped 8% this week and has declined nearly 90% in value since the company went public 4 years ago. It's the consumer spending with consumer spending down across restaurants. Sweetgreen is battling the perception that it primarily sells overpriced salads, which typically cost $14 to $16, which again isn't that bad. I mean, in all things considered, for a meal, a $14 to $16 salad full of items like that, like protein, like it's not that bad. So they go on in this article to just basically say that the 25 to 35-year-old demographic is just being hollowed out. The same thing with this Chipotle article in the Daily Upside. They're basically saying that student loans and slow wage growth are biting into the people our age, 25 to 35, where it's like there's not as much income. There's not as much free income anymore for us to be able to go out and spend like we did. Like I used to go to Chipotle every day when I was like 19 years old. I don't do that anymore. And so shares on Sweetgreen, shares on Chipotle, shares on Cava have all fallen. And there's just a lot of evidence that fast casual is kind of collapsing right now. So I have some ideas, but I just wanted to maybe get your thoughts first. I went a little bit long on that. What are your thoughts on this idea of fast casual collapsing, specifically those three, Sweetgreen, Cava, and Chipotle?
I think it's proximity bias, man. Like I think it's the closeness by which we can remember what you're talking about, the bowl being $8, and you feel like it's over and above value for what you're getting. And from a time-saving perspective, it's you don't have to cook, you don't have to clean up. It's relatively fast, like you get to see it kind of like prepared in front of you. You get to modify in the ways that you want to. It's like they ticked a lot of boxes. And the growth of Chipotle and the way that, they were able to build that company was very much so a blueprint for so many other people who wanted to kind of like get in the game with their version. You hear this in the way that people would talk about their business, the Chipotle of blank. I think some of the innovations, quote unquote, if you're even going to call it that, with what we've seen from a product perspective, a menu offering maybe perspective from Chipotle is like, if anything, Chipotle is downsized what they're offering. Like they're maybe offering a couple of extra protein options, but that's oftentimes because that's what the consumer is telling them. It's like, I don't need a bunch of different, ways to almost Taco Bell, like arrange the same ingredients into a different service format. I want my bowl, I want my salad, I want my burrito, and I just want to know that, like, again, talking about value, the portion sizes are going to be, like in line with what my expectations are. And then just trying to talk about another thing that I saw across my feed this week. Sweetgreen is doing this like 100-gram of protein bowl. They're like protein max yourself. And it was met with this kind of like, oh my God, applauding Sweetgreen for, like you're actually trying to quote unquote deliver value to the person who is, maybe a little bit more nutritionally minded or fitness oriented. But then you also had a bunch of people in the comments from what I was seeing saying, like you can make rice and ground beef at home for, like a drastic reduction in the price of this, because once you get up to that, level of protein in a bowl, it's something like after delivery fees and tax and tip, it's like it's a $35. Do you know what I mean? Like
just getting it in stores is a $21 bowl.
Yeah, exactly. And so, that I think is also something from an innovation perspective that, again, it is a result of the demand being so high during COVID. And then also, I'll just speak locally. I have a couple of other local stories that I want to touch on later in the episode here, is like delivery drivers in Seattle get paid $28 an hour, guaranteed, regardless of, you know what I mean? Like tip amount or number of orders that they're doing. And so all of these things have made these businesses in DoorDash and Uber Eats and all of these companies almost like Frankenstein. Like there's all these like appendages on them, because they have the success and the growth that they had from the pandemic. And then they have these other implications that have come on from, drivers and workers demanding more, cities putting increased regulations on, restaurant prices going up. And so they're very much so in this like weird place where if you've logged into any of these delivery apps in recent memory, you have things like, I can weirdly like go in person to a restaurant in DoorDash and check in the DoorDash app and say I'm dining in person, but I'm getting quote unquote perks through DoorDash, but then I'm also paying a subscription fee to DoorDash. It's like so, again, like confusing for the consumer. And again, like it makes it seem like when you're seeing the stock price go up or people talking about valuations on some of these companies that these businesses are quote unquote killing it. But I think it has become so messy and clunky that, again, I'm going to cover a story that maybe provides an alternative to some of these things. But I think all of it is you can't have, and this is maybe painting with a broad brush, but can you have Sweetgreen and Chipotle without DoorDash? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like it is a very symbiotic relationship that they have. And I think that when we're looking at some of these, I saw a tweet the other day that was like, uh, is your burrito bowl actually $35 or did you pay to have a private driver for it? And that's the reason that it's that expensive, right? Like you're thinking that it is this crazy exorbitant lunch that you just ordered for yourself. But what you're actually paying for is the speed and the convenience and all of these other steps that you could cut out for yourself in the context of your day. And if you don't look at your day in that way, talking about income and all of these sorts of things, it's going to seem like it's crazy expensive. And then that's going to not negatively affect your perception of DoorDash. You're going to put that onus on Sweetgreen.
Yeah, no, I want to just say one thing about just the American consumer in general. I think that there's a lot of macro things, growth or the lack thereof of wage growth affect the American consumer. I also just think like we have been over the last 40 years, 30 years in an era of really cheap food being cheaper probably than it should be. And this isn't like some classes like we need everything homemade and you all should be paying more. But it's just the reality that like fast food really gutted, I think, any perception of how expensive food should probably be. And so now you get to this point where costs are high, labor costs are high. Just operating a restaurant is so much more expensive now. You're not going to see this food be as cheap. But because we've operated so long in a system that valued making the cheapest product possible at the end of the day, the American diner has, I think they've just kind of associated cheapness with food. And food access should be cheap. It should be, you should have access to food. What I'm saying here though is like menu construction, menu pricing has at some points been artificially deflated, and that has in general harmed the consumer and harmed what they're able to attain. So when you get something like pricing at Chipotle or Sweetgreen doubling, that's probably where it always should have been. But because of how our food system has been set up for so long, it just feels like everything's breaking right now, and the price is being paid by the consumer in the end. So I really don't know where it goes from here. I don't see it ever going back down too much. But food's going to get more expensive. You have all these different conditions, and when we live in a country that relies so heavily, not only on our food supply, but international food supplies, and with everything going on in the world, I just don't see a world where things get too much better on a pricing front. I can see them stabilizing, but I don't see us going back because everything now is just a higher cost. So that's kind of my last thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, just really quick on that. If we were to maybe chart this out, what I'm hoping that we see in the future is that we've had this unfortunate effect of like prices being like suppressed or like people have been fearful to raise prices for some of this backlash stuff. And now that they've been made, it's almost like if we were to visualize this, it was a stair step up. Again, talking about previous years, and I'm sure if we actually charted this out, the chart would look different. But mentally, I think how people are perceiving some of this is what I want to ideally see is that it's a stair step up. So your burrito bowl was $8 and now it's $13. It feels like a big step up. And now it will be a slow ramp, right? So like people learn from the mistakes is how I want to see this going forward. And you are being more cost conscious. You are making sure that if you're seeing your costs go up, those reflect. And that, again, if you're going to keep prices low, you do some of the things that we talk about this show and adding value in other ways. What else you got?
Justin,
Or do you want to turn it over to me?
I have one more quick one.
Please.
I want to just riff maybe for like 8 to 10 minutes on the response to Michelin.
Okay. Yeah.
I didn't have this in our notes. I forgot to add it in, but I was reading about it this morning. I just want to do some off the cuff chat real quick.
Sure.
So you had the reaction podcast. Obviously, there was a ton of reaction. My view, and you let me know if you agree with this, was that some chefs in some of the smaller markets kind of felt underwhelmed at the amount of stars they've gotten. And there was a post by Drew the Food Guy on Instagram. They kind of want to read some parts. I'll summarize some stuff because it's quite long, and I definitely suggest reading it out. But I just kind of wanted to like share what he shared, and maybe get your reaction to it because I kind of was aligned with a lot of what he said. So he says that predictions are way off. Outrage didn't make sense. People were shocked when truly great restaurants earned stars, and equally shocked when pretty good places didn't. It's not that Dallas doesn't care about food. We're just new to Michelin's framework, and the way we're talking about the guide makes that clear. He goes on to say. Michelin stars are based on these 5 criteria, and he gives it. And I think one thing is like consistency. So there's no weak dishes, there's no dips in execution, there's no hero dish carrying the meal. I think maybe looking back, maybe Alinea maybe suffered from that a little bit on the hero reliance on hero dishes. So he goes on to say that Michelin stars aren't based on many of the things diners often focus on. And I thought this was a key point. And he goes on to list the decor, the room or ambiance, the service style, friendliness of staff, portion sizes, trendiness, and wine programs. I would disagree maybe on service a little bit. We can save that for another day. He says they evaluate on what's happening on the plate, the technique, flavor, identity, and consistency. Those things help shape the experience, but they're not a part of the criteria that the Michelin has laid out for earning a star. So then he just goes on to say that the fact that so many Dallas diners couldn't look at this restaurant and immediately recognize its level, it was Mamani in Dallas, says something important. It shows that we're not used to evaluating technique. We're not used to menus with 0 weak points. We confuse I prefer with this is better. We judge restaurants by comfort, portions, and vibes. We haven't built the reference points that cities with long fine dining histories have. We underestimate what true world-class cooking looks like up close. And he goes on to say about this restaurant, Mamani, that in terms of precision, discipline, structure, and execution, it's the best restaurant in Dallas right now. I'm not here to argue that. But he goes on to say, like, again, many Dallas diners evaluate restaurants based on vibes, service, decor, generosity, friendliness, portions, and price. Michelin evaluates on technique, execution, precision, flavor clarity, menu coherence, and consistency. 2 completely different languages. And so Michelin is human. It's the most structured, calibrated, globally consistent evaluation system we have. You don't have to love Michelin, but understanding it is essential if you're going to critique it. I thought it was a good point. I think what I take away from this is like, I saw this with the Philly list. I think only 3 restaurants received a star. And I have friends in Philly where they said we had seen all these articles on this place is a 2-star, and maybe they could even be a 3-star, and a bunch of these places are going to get 1 star. You saw it in Boston too. It's like all these places where like the influencers went and media darlings and all this stuff. And the Michelin comes out, and it's like, Philly, you get 3 1-star restaurants. In Dallas, you don't get everything. You don't get to have everything you want to have a star. And diners are left very confused, especially in these cities with rising food repertoire. I think I look at Buffalo. It's a perfect example. I don't know that Michelin will ever go there, but there's so many restaurants there that people love and crave and are delicious. But it's hard to figure out would any of them ever even be considered a Michelin star restaurant. There are a couple maybe that could get 1 or a bit gourmand. There are some fine dining hitters, or there's some experiences, but just because a restaurant is like beloved doesn't mean it gets rated on Michelin. And so I just kind of wanted your thoughts, if you had any, on like the backlash, but the response, because I saw a lot of it in light of this, and it felt like a very like response heavy Michelin guide rollout this year. So your thoughts?
I think you covered the guest side really well, talking about why maybe people are disappointed or they thought that their beloved place that they've been either going to for years or their cousin works at or whatever should have maybe gotten a star. We can pontificate on that all day long. I'm going to take it in a different direction that might maybe overlap or provide value to the person who dines out a lot, who might be listening to the show, or even if you're early on in your career and you're kind of thinking about Michelin restaurants as appealing, a step that you want to take, a season that you want to spend in your career. So I often get messages from people who are just like so taken aback by their first experience in a Michelin kitchen. It is different. Ray and I have both spent time in Michelin restaurants. I have worked certainly on the 3-star level and then gone to places that didn't have 3 stars and then gone to places who were just totally casual. So like my experience runs the full gamut. And I think you would be maybe doing a disservice to somebody if you're saying that somebody who works at a quote unquote 3-star level then goes to the next place in a not Michelin represented city and carries every single thing about that operation into their new concept. Because typically what you see is steps get, cut out, or you want to save time, or you don't actually want to be like that run ragged in the way that you're kind of like paying attention to all of the details and cleanliness standards. And like, I'm not saying people that don't run Michelin kitchens run slop houses. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot that you um, need to, I would argue, sacrifice. Like there's a lot of stuff that you sacrifice in effort when you're in a, especially 3 Michelin starred kitchen. That just
We
seems like,
can we
go
put a
ahead.
bullet point in that? Save your thought because I want you to
Yeah,
continue on it. But I just had a question because I
go
saw this a
ahead.
lot.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's a lot of, especially on the Linea conversation, there's a lot of like, oh, well, this person only like worked at a Linea. So like, of
Sure.
course they weren't able to like adapt. I kind
Right.
of like was a little confused by that because if your goal is to be working at the best restaurant and you get a job there and you rise up there, like, how is that a fault of that person to
Mm,
like be there? I just kind of, you're that I've seen that as well. It's adjacent to what you
yeah.
just said.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like if you're gonna go for, again, I'm gonna make this really concrete because I feel like I'm talking in like too high up in the clouds here. If you worked at a 2 Michelin star restaurant in New York, and you decide that you grew up in Boston, your family's in Boston, you want to like, again, have lower cost of living, the stuff that I talked about in the last episode, a little bit of a slower pace, less traffic, and you go to Boston. It's like, are you going to exactly copy and paste that 2 Michelin star restaurant in Boston? I would argue that you're not. And I certainly came to Seattle in the what was it, 8 years ago that I came here, because I didn't want to pursue stars. I was like, I've done the Michelin thing. I just want to like build a really profitable business. That was kind of like my goal. And then I ran into this frustration when I was doing pop-up dinners where I was like, well, shoot, man. Like, and I worked with people here in Seattle who were like ex-Michelin people, and they would sing their frustrations to me. And I was like, and we saw this recently with the head chef of Canlis. I'm going to cover Canlis later on in the show, which is like one of the fine dining restaurants here in Seattle. Be frustrated at the fact that she goes through all of this toil and effort and she can't get a star because Seattle doesn't have a Michelin restaurant representation here. And so that was my common criticism that I would sing, as I would be like, what's the best thing that's going to happen if you create a really, really awesome fine dining restaurant here in Seattle? You're going to get your James Beard. Seattle Times is going to write something really nice about you. And then it's like, what is going to continue to keep you going year after year after year? Because as we're talking about, if these businesses are not hyper profitable, again, you could pivot and maybe like argue that you make it that way. I just kind of like, as much as we can badmouth Michelin in certain ways about the way that they operate or the way that they choose restaurants or don't choose restaurants, there is a motivation factor there that serves as a North Star for a lot of chefs. And that's what keeps them going. You see it in the way that they post about it on Instagram. Like, you have restaurants who don't post for months at a time, and then the Michelin Guide comes out and all of a sudden they're gonna break their quote unquote streak of not posting stuff to literally say, thank you for allowing us to retain this star. Because they probably see a direct correlation between them having that award, them having that standing, and guests choosing them over the competitor down the street. Like, it really like cuts through the noise. And then the important thing that I've certainly experienced in Seattle is it reflects in the talent that you attract. Because you hear Ray and I talk about when we came out of culinary school, we wanted to go into Michelin starred fine dining places. It's like you basically cut yourself off at the knees to potential graduates or people getting into the industry, even if they didn't go to culinary school, because it's like, if you're young and hungry and able-bodied, and again, like you can work a 12-hour day and bounce back and show up for the next 4 days of the work week, it's like you're gonna go work in a fine dining kitchen.
But
And
it's
so
also
when you
just
don't,
like,
yeah,
this the level of talent you attract. Not that I'm like, I hate calling myself level of talent, but like, I came to Chicago to stage in a Michelin restaurant. I live here now working as a food development chef for a food manufacturing company. Like, and they're two
yes,
completely different things. It's like, but because
totally,
Chicago, and something in my mind was like, Michelin, Chicago food, good opportunities. I want to be in the Chicago region and work.
totally. And
And it's
so
like,
all of those things are like flow-on effects of a Michelin representation in a city. And so I basically say this to say, don't be disappointed in a Dallas or a Boston or a Philly or even like a Denver or a Vancouver when they got their Michelin Guide finally. When we're looking around and we're saying, where are all of the, like heavy hitters here? Because they were not incentivized to behave in that way. Now that there is a carrot dangled in front of those teams and those chefs, the ones that do want that, they're going to change the way that they operate. They're going to, and then again, we saw this with Wolf's Taylor in Denver. It's like they leveled up, and now it's all of a sudden they're getting recognized for it. Talking about Emeralds, it's like EJ and that team leveled up, and now all of a sudden, like, they are getting rewarded for it, and it becomes a flywheel situation for that organization. And so it's almost like, don't be upset that the flywheel isn't working when one part of the machine is not there. It's non-existent, right? So it's like, you can get upset that all this effort gets poured in from the chef and the team and the vision and the room and the budget being spent, but then there's no reinforcement mechanism in Michelin to communicate to guests that this is worth going to. And so of course you're not going to experience a flywheel. Like, it's, to me, it's so obvious. And again, like, because I had to live this out firsthand, it just seems particularly palpable for me. But then again, people are having to see this play out in their city. And again, I'm not saying all of these places should go for Michelin stars or change their concept or transform their business into something they quote unquote hate. But I'm saying now, for the chefs that do want it, it is available to you. I talked about opportunity being available in the last episode, because I think that, again, for the people who want it, it's there for the taking now.
And you articulated this well. I think a lot of people see Michelin as like a vanity thing. And it's not. I don't see it that way. But I think the one thing that you see now in a industry that's so competitive is like having Michelin star drives business, and
Yes.
it could be that. I think a lot of chefs maybe in these new cities were hoping for that, because that helps them stand out against competition, helps them drive business. And at the risk of going too long, I have one more quick question on this. Is this what is your approach to the idea that I've seen some chefs kind of, I don't say reprimand guests, but like to preach to guests or talk to guests and kind of like not full out blaming them, but semi blaming them, or semi saying like, you need to play as well if you want to see these things. What are your thoughts on that? Because like, you see a place like EJ's in Emeralds, like he revamped it, but like the core like Emeralds experience, it's just modernized, right? So I don't know. I kind of felt a little weird about some of the like putting it back on the guests or customers of some of these cities, where it's like it's kind of your job to kind of gauge on what customers or guests want and go from there. And then that's kind of where Michelin fits in. Any thoughts on the turning it back towards the customers?
I think if guests knew exactly what they wanted, we wouldn't need a Michelin guide. Like, there would be this direct relationship you could have with people where they would tell you what they want, they would tell you what's good and what's not. They would be the arbiters of quote unquote criticism and all of that. But that's not what we see. And so the reason Michelin has just a reason to exist is because it is this, like, we go to all the places. Not only that, but we go multiple times. Not only that, but we send people who know what they're talking about in our inspectors going to those places. And then I've talked about this before, we basically make a tier list in 3 Michelin stars, 2 Michelin stars, 1 Michelin stars, in the same way that you'll see video game rankings doing, S tier, A tier, B tier. And so that gives people a very clear framework for like what is good and how I can, decide when my wife and I are going to go for our anniversary, what type of place should we go based on the amount of money that we want to spend and the experience that we want to have. And so I sometimes think that it is this paradox where you can certainly have cities that have a very well-versed dining population. We see this in a city like Chicago. I talked about the different genres, quote unquote, of restaurants that have been able to achieve 3 Michelin stars in Chicago, going on the classic French side to the crazy modernist side to now the, maybe a little bit more like close to nature way that John Shields and the team at Smith does it. And so, and I've had food experiences, Ray, I'm sure you have too, in Chicago, that are just like across the board interesting. It's like people know Chicago for hot beef sandwiches and deep dish pizza, but it's like you can get great sushi in Chicago. Like, I grew up in the Midwest. It was not something that I, like immediately thought of like, oh my goodness, I'm going to get really great fish here because I'm so far away from the coast. And so you sometimes see the backlash in other places where you can have a really talented chef go to an area, and because, again, I'm not trying to, again, this sounds elitist when I phrase it in this way, but like guests don't get it because, again, it's like their experience is one type of restaurant or a level of execution in restaurants. I think I've gone on a rant previously about flying in airlines and the difference between like economy and business class and then first class. And the first time I experienced business class, I thought it was first class because it was like I was so far beyond my level of comprehension that there could be something better than what I experienced in business class. And so that sometimes is something that guests experience. And again, with all of this stuff, Michelin has a long-term time horizon. I have on my bookshelf here the original 1909, I think it is. I think it's 1900 Michelin guide here, where it's like it's a long game that they're playing. And when they decide to go into a market, they're ideally looking to stay there for the long haul in a way that we've seen other lists and other places just totally buck, in a way that like World's 50 Best will give you number one and then you can't get number one again. And then you go into this different list. And so Michelin is thinking in a much longer term time horizon here. And I think people just need to come to terms with the fact that this stuff is going to take time. Because if you've ever worked in any of these environments, and we're like direct experience here, I remember some of those days when the chef that I was working for, we didn't have a star. Michelin came to the city, we had our inspection, and we didn't get a star. And I'm sitting across the table and chef's like, we're going to try to go for the star. Things are going to change. And, like that's how it typically happens. Again, if other people have stories around this happening, like please send it to us in a DM or post it in a comment down below the video, because I just think that like seeing more of this stuff makes it so that as Michelin has been increasingly more keen on pulling the curtain back a little bit, because there is sometimes this disconnect with guests and guests don't get it, or guests think that it's all, again, how you're talking about it, Ray, a vanity thing. It's like people see that it actually matters. And so just all things that I think are important to discuss.
Thank you for ripping on that.
So I have a couple stories I want to dig into. Maybe I'll start with the one that kind of more dovetails off of the affordability thing. And then I have two local stories that the reason I'm covering them, one is because I wanted to kind of like dive a little bit deeper into them. But then also, I think that similar to what I talked about, talking in the clouds a lot and then really coming back down into the dirt and talking about the story, I think that there's a lot of lessons we can take from some of these that I'm going to apply, even if you are not a Seattle-based person or even if you don't live in the U.S., you might resonate with some of the broader implications or details of these stories. So the first one, I sent this link to you, Ray. It's a company called Picnic. And so their URL is trypicnic.com. And this came across my feed when it was like business people that I follow on X were posting about this being launched. And then the layers started to kind of peel, so to speak. Travis Kalanick, who we've covered on the show, has Cloud Kitchens as a company. Travis Kalanick is involved in this company. And so trypicnic.com is a company that is effectively trying to, quote unquote, disrupt the office delivery, lunches in the workplace, catering market. And their big pitch is no delivery fees and no tips. And so how in the world does this work? So if you go onto the website, there's a couple restaurants that they're listing right now. Sweetgreen, Taco Bell, Wingstop, Tender Greens, Mendocino Farms are the ones that are like scrolling along the website. And they have a couple of different options where you can apply as a restaurant partner or you can get it for your office. As it's not exactly clear to me how the pricing works, so I'm, again, extrapolating here, but I think that I'm on the right track with how they've decided to lay out how some of this works. So as I understand it, if Ray, you and I decide to open a Repertoire office and hire 100 employees, all of a sudden now we can become users of Picnic and we can send out a link to all 100 of our employees and say, lunch is on us on Wednesday. Everybody goes in the app and decides what they're going to want. And instead of what currently happens where, again, you're going to have multiple delivery drivers that are required to pick up this massive slew of orders, you and I are going to have to send maybe some employees down to the Sweetgreen to go pick up everything. We're going to have to worry about how much do I tip because this order is like particularly large, and all of these, again, like problems they're quote unquote seeing in the market. How I'm seeing it is Picnic has shared that pricing on the items is effectively the same as it would be in the restaurant. I don't necessarily buy that because they're saying you can expect to pay what you would pay in the restaurant. And so what I think is happening is they're saying it's a $16 bowl, quote unquote, that our employees can get. But then built into that economically is the delivery fee, is the quote unquote tip, the hourly wage that they need to pay to the driver, the profit margin for the restaurant. And so what I think they're doing behind the scenes is having large group orders basically be like bundled together. There's that quote in technology that any great product is bundling or unbundling. And I think similar to what I talked about early on in the episode, so many of these apps and services have become these Franken companies where they have to add this fee and they have to add this whatever. And it feels like flying Spirit Airlines when you go to make an order on any of these apps and services. And so what we've seen Picnic do is say, we're just going to bundle it together. It's one price. And that I think is like the killer thing that they're hoping to leverage here to try to make sure that, again, Travis, I can imagine, is also trying to think about some of these concepts he's creating in cloud kitchens can now seamlessly integrate here so that not only are you used to getting the best price on Picnic, but then now also from a profit margin perspective, you're making a bunch more. So I want to go into some of the numbers here. So Picnic has said, let me just get these exact numbers here, is oh no, this is the 4 restaurants. So they've said that $14,000 is the average monthly GMV for Picnic restaurant partners. So holy cow, like that's like a huge boost in your business. If you're going to be getting that much additional order volume, you might need to staff for it. You might need to, consider what the lead times are that you set on the app for how all of this works. They're getting 32 average daily orders from Picnic for our restaurant partners and 2,500 monthly orders from one of our top restaurant partners last month. And so I find that, I've worked in some of these companies and on consulting projects, like sometimes you take your star performer and use that as, thankfully they have said, like from one of our top restaurant partners, they're not saying it's guaranteed that you're going to make some of this stuff.
Yeah.
But it seems very white glove from an onboarding perspective, where if you're a restaurant that has capacity for this and you are particularly slow during lunch, you're interested in making a little bit of extra revenue per month, you're interested in, again, like kind of maybe amortizing some cost for you and your team, they get back to you within 24 hours. They discuss the ops, food offering, and expansion plans, and then you're a Picnic partner, and then you get featured in the app for, again, the way that they are probably going out and recruiting users, quote unquote customers, in the person who is in charge of doing office lunches for people. And how they're, again, phrasing the benefits for teams here is the food arrives hot and ready because it's one delivery instead of 3 or 4 delivery drivers. And then again, it's like everything from an expensing perspective is covered because one person pays for it instead of needing to go in and do all of this time on, oh, how much was your lunch? Oh, I forgot to, send my receipt for this, blah, 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 blah. It's all condensed. And so it's just a really interesting approach to tackling this problem. And I can imagine that once they kind of hit a critical mass on profitability here, because they have seen that there is a bigger benefit to these larger group orders that happen. I can imagine this is also in like bigger cities where this can make sense. We might see something like all of this swinging back the other way, where certain people, again, from a consumer perspective, are lamenting about the fact that my lunch is $36. And now I can see how every single cost is broken down. I was trying to find on the Picnic website, like, is there a membership fee that people are charging where that's very Amazon Costco model, where that's where Picnic is making their profit. And then that's the reason they can quote unquote charge cost on the stuff here. The way that I see it working is either the team is trying to do the Uber strategy of just keep things like break even so that we can get users, or they're building the quote unquote profit and the margin is somewhere in the fact that, the bowl costs the restaurant $12. The restaurant's going to get the $12, but in the app you see it as $14.50, and that's where Picnic takes it. But again, because it's such a mass group order, because there's other efficiencies they've managed to identify, they're able to, again, say no delivery fee, no tip. And again, the guys at the TBPN podcast, Tech Bro Podcast Network, they covered this, and they were talking about this idea of tips being they don't prompt for tips at the right time. If you ask for a tip before the service is rendered, it's hard to use the tip as a feedback mechanism. When I order from a grocery store, I don't even know if they see the tip. In theory, I tip because I want you to not throw the drinks around so they explode. Like, there's a lot of funny quotes from, these guys who, I think they're based out of LA, and, they're lamenting around the experience of, like doing any of these delivery things. And Travis chimed in the thread And he went on this really interesting rant about price elasticity and feedback mechanisms and all this stuff. So if you're nerdy about tips and the way that like average consumers are thinking about tips and delivery fees and how this is all transformed over time, I just think it's an interesting company. And I think that, again, there's an opportunity here that consumers are sometimes asking for, or maybe it's a subsection of the market that is maybe underserved. I just wanted to kind of bring it up in the context of what we've been covering.
Definitely.
Your
No,
thoughts?
I don't have much to add beyond. I think it's an interesting niche item that this is the type of product that maybe your general consumer doesn't like really care about. But if you're a restaurant, you want this almost, it's like it's setting up a B2B channel, basically. And like
Totally.
that can be very lucrative, especially if you're a restaurant in a major metropolitan area like in New York or Chicago. I mean, look at EMP. Why did they cite going off of plant-based? They couldn't get people to come in for their business lunch hours because not everyone was wanted to eat plant-based. So it's just like, this is a very important part of dining, part of restaurant businesses in major cities. And so I could see it taking off and doing well. So
I have a couple of other stories I want to dig into. The first one, let's go with the Canlis story, because I think, again, like there's lessons here that even if you are not a Pacific Northwest restaurant, Seattle does not have a Michelin guide. And I talked about how if you find success in Seattle, one of the measures of that is Seattle Times is going to write something nice about you. Canlis experienced the opposite over the past month. And the Seattle Times, specifically Bethany Jean Clement, who is the Seattle Times food writer, tore Canlis apart. And the title of the article says, "Seattle's Canlis is not quite what it used to be," says our critic. And you have to keep in mind that this is on the heels of Canlis changing the executive chef. And so the chef that I interviewed on the podcast, Brady Ishiwata Williams, was there for a long time. He left, and Aisha took his place, and she just left, citing some of those reasons being that I can't find the recognition that I'm hoping for here. I'm interested in maybe some other markets. There's been articles about that have kind of given her specific reasons that if people want more insights there. So what they did was Canlis now promoted someone internally to now be the chef of Canlis. And I want to read a couple of the pieces of feedback that the food writer shared, which, again, mirrored some of my experiences when my wife and I went right after our first son was born. So this was like a year and a half-ish ago. We went to Canlis for the first time. We've lived in Seattle for a really long time and never made it to Canlis. And there's a lot of stuff that I would certainly agree with in this review. So it talks about some of how Canlis navigated COVID. It talks about Canlis's $180 per person pre-fee format remains in place. Over the course of several recent visits, the food was overwrought, mystifying, and almost entirely unpleasant to eat, with one experience somewhat being a stunning outlier. And then she goes into, again, talking about specifics, which I'm a really, really big fan of seeing critics do, not just saying, well, the experience was kind of underwhelming, or, like all of that leaves up to the imagination, the fact that the person has really high expectations going into this meal, or you were trying to compare it to something else, as opposed to evaluating it for what it was when you went to go experience it. So I'll read some things, and then you can maybe reflect for yourself, is this something that guests have said about us? Or is this something that I've maybe experienced that I haven't been able to put into words at a recent meal that I've had? And then again, this can all serve in a constructive way. I want all of this to not be a dunking thing. I want this to be like, how can we take a look at, oh, interesting, that's something that I noticed that maybe one of our courses is experiencing right now. And I want to like get ahead of that and proactively change how we're doing this so that something like this does not happen to you. Because from what I've personally seen locally, like people do not want to go to Canlis, you know what I mean? Like going forward, because one of the brothers is no longer a part of the organization. The chef is not receiving that much high praise. And again, Canlis as an organization is just kind of like in a weird spot right now. So let me read some of these. Quote, problems emerged from the start of each night in the dining room. One evening, an initial snack of waffle cup potato chips were oily, heavy, and stale. Several weeks later, sweet potato and parsnip chips were the same. It was a fun idea. Who doesn't love fancy chips? But these sat uneaten. Quote, odd textures and off-kilter proportions in the small bites, meant to whet the appetite, rendered them puzzling at best. A dollop of Dungeness crab salad topped a too thick pad of steamed kohlrabi that diluted the flavor, filling the mouth with wateriness. A piece of okra had a stiff, deep-fried carapace, and then a vicious interior with a bitter taste. A local oyster met a sad end, torched in a thin membrane of wagyu that ended up distressingly chewy, end quote. And then it does talk about some praise. It says, quote, the most enjoyable dish overall was one night's main of halibut, marinated in sake leaves for 3 days and smoked over hay. It was perfectly seared, the flesh lush underneath, presented prettily with tomato, basil leaves, and a lobe of aggressively smoky eggplant puree. And then it goes on to talk about a couple of other, like positives. Then it talks about, while the Canlis dining room remains endlessly pleasant, lit like a twilight, spacious and tranquil, the linens silently smoothed with a cordless iron as the tables turn, the usual world-class service had a few seams showing. Upon one arrival, outerwear was allowed into the dining room, and then stayed crumpled on a banquette. At one departure, a coat and hat couldn't immediately be located. These count as the most minute of first world problems, but the Canlis coat check is renowned for its apparent effortlessness. It's famously ticket-free. It's run by some trick of institutional memory. And so again, like, I do know that as a common thing, that like you just leave your coat with somebody at the door when you go to Canlis, and then magically like they give you your correct coat without a ticket at the end of your thing. Again, it's an operational, just like point of magic, unreasonable hospitality that like they're showing to guests that, again, is like, it's weirdly just off. Like you come and you expect these things. And also I've covered on the podcast, Canlis famously one summer recently, I think it was last summer, went to Monday through Friday as the days that they were going to be open. They had like parties during COVID in the main lawn in front of the restaurant that they were doing. So they've tried a lot of like experiments, and they've been like trying to, test things in the restaurant. But I'll read a couple more things and then I can get your thoughts. Again, I'm not expecting you to, really pontificate on this, Ray, without having eaten at Canlis, but just the way that people can respond to some of these critiques is maybe an interesting point to get into. Quote, the outlier experience was an evening spent exploring Canlis's bar menu. Served in the lounge tucked behind the entrance's grand stone fireplace, it's a much more casual a la carte affair, and currently it's featuring some of the place's classic dishes of yesteryear. The famous Canlis salad is a nice one, Caesar adjacent with additions including fresh mint and oregano. On the dining room menu, it's the sole add-on, made tableside for $20 per person, with the entire party's participation required, and it feels like an expensive and strange digression. In the lounge, it's $18, refreshing and enough to share, split on 2 plates without a word said. In the past, there's been a bar burger. At the moment, it's a patty melt made with rosy, dry-aged ribeye, smoked provolone, and buttery toasted homemade sourdough. It's better than any hamburger in the city. And so that touches on some of the stuff we've been talking about with value perception. Like, yes, you're taking someone from the front of house team in the dining room to make your salad tableside, but when people see that, like, oh, I could just come into the bar and the thing to order here is the Canlis salad, which again, a lot of people talk about, here at least locally, it creates this weird perception of value. And so like there's a pricing problem there that is causing people to kind of like tilt their heads and be like, what are you trying to pull on me here? And then again, talking about things like the burger being this thing that this food writer is going to write home about, it's just an interesting piece here. And so Canlis did put out a statement. They said, hey, Mark here, which is one of the brothers, just being honest, that last review kind of stung. Even if we disagree with it, we respect the process. My belief in our team is unchanged. Caring for this city has always been our aim, and as always, we're on it. And then it's like a post of the entire team in the dining room, kind of like the pre-service meeting that they're going through. And on Reddit, where this was posted, like people are taking every opportunity to kind of dunk on Canlis here. But I just think it's fascinating to kind of see a place that has been in such good standing ever since I've lived here just really get the local publication turned on them. And then to see how this is all going to kind of like play out in a way that there's so many other factors with the chef leaving and then somebody internal getting promoted. And again, like that's a horrible situation. Like talking about like the Alinea problem going from, the chef de cuisine maybe maintained or maybe recently changed, having a 3-star restaurant, and you're the person who causes the restaurant to experience this negative piece of press. It's just, there's a lot going on here. I don't know. Ray, do you have thoughts on this? It's just something that I wanted to cover for people.
I never eaten Canlis. I'm not familiar with Seattle cuisine. I'll say that reading the review, and this could be totally off. How the review read reminded me how I felt when I went to Fire by Alinea, where like it was a cool concept. The dishes were on paper all seemed like they should work, and like we just kind of left it where we didn't eat a lot of bites of a lot of things, and it just seemed off. Like it was like like the techniques were off on each dish. It was like nothing was hitting at 100%. Everything was kind of like 70%. So that's how I kind of felt reading the review. Again, never eaten there, but yeah, it is interesting to see, and it's always interesting. I think people like this. What people want are changing, and I think sometimes restaurants are bad. If like you have a change, you might rely on things that got you there, where you really should be relying on items that are maybe got to push you forward. So
There's one Reddit comment that, again, I don't have any insights to, but it is a bringing it down to the dirt thing of what I covered on the rant on Michelin kitchens being an important place and crucible to kind of get your standards checked and to upskill yourself and to see what's possible on the level of execution that you're operating under. This person said, probably a screw up promoting Huffman from within as head chef. And again, I don't know who this chef is. I've never had their food. And the commenter goes on to say, feel like you'd want someone who has worked in high-end kitchens and no, Cafe Juanita as a 22-year-old isn't it, which is another like seemingly fine dining place on the east side of Seattle, which again has been around for a really long time and people really love it, but it is not, quote unquote Michelin level of execution. This commenter goes on to say, also not sure how involved Brian Canlis was before Mark bought him out, but things seem to be going in a bad direction. Never really liked the place, but I know it's iconic and a shame if it goes downhill. And so weirdly, this also mirrors what we're seeing with the partnership existing between these two heavy hitters in the brothers, Brian and Mark. And I think in a lot of ways it mirrors Grant and Nick at Alinea. And now all of a sudden when one of the partners leaves, it's like all of these negatives start to come out. Like it's too eerily close from a timeline perspective to, again, like it's hard to say if that's like the singular thing you can point to and say this is the thing. But again, it's like it rhymes a little bit too closely in what I'm seeing. But that's, I guess, where I wanted to leave the Canlis story. If anybody has thoughts, please leave them for us, because again, we're kind of curious. If you work at Canlis, I'd certainly be eager to get into a conversation because, again, it's a local thing for me, and I would never wish ill on any restaurant. Talking again about a restaurant that has gone like really downhill from a group perspective. For those that aren't familiar, there's a chef in Seattle named Josh Henderson. And this is also a weird thing for me to cover because Josh has been brought to one of my pop-up dinners from a guest who was like a real estate person in restaurants in Seattle once upon a time. And so I've cooked for him. I have met him in person. I've gone to panels that he's spoken on in the city in the past. And the title of the piece that Eater put out here last month was How to Build, Then Lose a Restaurant Empire. And so we'll leave it below because it really goes into like interviewing Josh. I think that he has certainly gone through his own struggles and he's much more transparent with how he talks about it in a way that he wasn't when all of this stuff was really going down, when he was losing some of his restaurants and people were making allegations and he was having to juggle like his personal life and his family. And so he basically, there's a couple of different quotes that I wanted to highlight and then again, really bring it down to concrete examples for what we talk about in the show on a broad sweeping basis. So it's maybe about a third of the way down into the article. He says, quote, this is the writer saying, quote, some people who worked for him, Josh Henderson, have praised his talent and open-heartedness. But as he left the restaurant groups he founded and took on more responsibility for financial operations, chaos ensued. Employees at both Burbs and the Galley complained of late paychecks. He could make a mean burger, maybe the best burger you've ever eaten, but managing a restaurant, let alone a restaurant group, required an entirely different set of skills, end quote. And we talk about this all the freaking time. And I'm so glad that, like, one, these chefs are willing to be open and transparent about the fact that this is a reality for them. They're not, like, just struggling behind the scenes with it. And then it allows us to highlight it as a case study for someone who is interested in doing something like this. I'm not saying everybody absolutely needs to be financially literate, but I think if you have ambitions to do a restaurant group someday, just cooking is not going to be enough for you. You can either be the one to get those skills or you can involve other people alongside you as partners to handle that responsibility, because when it doesn't get handled, we see situations like this. I'll add one more quote from Josh and then I kind of want to hear your thoughts, Ray. Quote, my strength was in what we were putting on the plate. My weakness was the financial aspect. I'm talented at cooking, but as far as running a kitchen and that kind of thing, that's not my world, end quote. Awesome to see from the sense of the self-awareness and the willingness to say, I don't know. This is not, again, something I'm brushed up on, but it is also really cool to see it highlighted as a skill. This is something you can get better at. This is something we talk about all the time. at Repertoire. And so I'm curious your thoughts, Ray.
I think it's smart. I mean, I think it's a good acknowledgement. I mean, we go back, and Alinia's top of mind. You had Grant, you had Nick Kokonis, right? There's a reason why Nick Kokonis was such a big part of Alinia's success. I mean, you look at us, like we partnered together because we each have different skill sets that we can rely upon. And so it's like, I think being able to just say like, yeah, I'm really good at cooking, but maybe I'm not the strongest in financials. Maybe that opens up for him to get a partner. Maybe that opens up for him to have someone come in like that. There's no negatives in that, if that makes sense.
And that doesn't make you any less of a chef. Like I really want to like hammer that home. That's the reason that I talk all the time about the cook to chef to entrepreneur trajectory, because if you want to step into that, you have to kind of like acknowledge that there's some changes that need to be made. And if you want to stay the chef, that's awesome, because then you have the opportunity to hire other people who are more entrepreneurially minded to surround yourself with. And so with that, I think we're going to close it out. If you're enjoying these episodes, please like, please subscribe, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, like the video, subscribe to us on YouTube, especially if you're interested in getting some clips, and we will see you in the next episode.